be working on the Rev 250. We've got some exciting things we're doing here at the museum. We're creating a new exhibit for that. Hopefully we'll be able to roll that out in the next year or so. And so we're hoping you'll come back to see that and get a little taste of all the stuff that took place here, because we had 2 battles, we had some skirmishes, we had we have a legend that's connected to Casey and Emily Giger. So there's a lot of good stuff on the Revolution here, and come back and get those stories and collect those stories. So I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, and we're excited to have him here, Dennis Michael Bowman, okay, and he is from Sumter, South Carolina, and he graduated from Spartanburg Methodist College. He's also a graduate of Lander University. He has a history major with a secondary education teacher's certificate in social studies. He taught in the school system at Hillcrest Middle School in Sumter County. He's also a ordained minister, and he is with the Green Acres Assembly of God in Sumter, South Carolina. And he's also the historic house manager at the Sumter Museum. He's married to his wife, Catherine Bowman, for 20 plus years. They have 2 teenage sons, Samuel and Cameron, and he's a member of the 250 Committee for Sumter County. And so I'm going to leave it in his capable hands. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Andy.
Huzzah.
It is a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see familiar faces. I think I've met the faces I recognize. I've met through the 250th probably at one point or another, and I've seen some faces from here over at Sumter at the museum. I've been blessed to work there for a little over 2 years, well, almost 3 years now, at Sumter Museum. But having grown up there, of course, I was familiar with the grounds, familiar with the house, familiar with some of the things they had. So when I started working at the Sumter Museum, one of our permanent exhibits, of course, is on General Thomas Sumter. And as part of a grant from the 250th, we redid our Thomas Sumter exhibit. We tried to focus on his more well-known battles associated with his leadership in the militia here in South Carolina, but at the same time, our goal was to incorporate a general history of his whole life. And you'll see that when you go to the Thomas Sumter room. I think it's officially labeled the Thomas Sumter Interpretive Set here in South Carolina. But it is a neat experience to be able to kind of work with the history of the Sumter family and some of the artifacts that we have that, of course, were right there where he lived. So we have them firsthand. What I wanted to do in my presentation is just kind of give you a well-rounded history of the man. And that's what I was pretty much asked to do. I know he participated here at Fort Granby, the post on the Congarese, some of the sieges that took place here and trying to retake the post from the British. But instead of focusing on the history that all of you guys probably know much more than I do, I want to just give a general history of Thomas Sumter. There are 2 well-known biographies on Sumter, the 2 that probably the most well-known. The first complete biography that we know about is the Anne King Gregory, and I believe this was actually published back in the 1930s. And she did some research using the Draper papers. Lyman Draper had the most extensive collection on Thomas Sumter. He's not from here, but a historian, a writer. He got interested in Sumter. He knew one of the guys in Virginia that knew Sumter, I think fought with him in the Revolution. And he started collecting all of this primary source documentation on Sumter. We're blessed over at the York County Museum to have a lot of the information from those primary source documents. But the collection is actually held somewhere with the University of Wisconsin, of all places.
That's where most of Draper's stuff.
Right.
And thanks to the SC 250 grant there at Southern Railroad Institute in York.
Right.
That we're hopefully soon, kind of like the Francis Marion papers, we're hoping to publish those soon.
Yeah.
Sumter papers.
That'd be great. I was able to go there and do some research, and we were doing this project, and met Zach and sat down and talked with him to get on there and look at all the information. It was neat to be able to find primary source documents where you had a letter between Greene and Sumter, or Sumter to Marion, Marion to Sumter. And I know there's a lot of history tales about people that didn't like each other and whatever, but a lot of their letters are very honorable, correspondence between people. However, things may have played out before the war was over. Well, let's just get into it. Just give you some general history and talk a little bit about it. And if you go to Sumter, some of you have been there, but if you go to our exhibit, you'll see this information, or at least most of this information available to you. So the early days of Thomas Sumter, he is born to immigrate. His parents immigrated here from England in the early 1700s. His mother, although she came from like more of a well-to-do family, she is said to married beneath her socioeconomic level, I think, to child her parents, and she came to the colonies when her first husband passed away. And then she met William Sumter, Thomas Sumter's dad. They married. They moved out onto the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains there in Virginia, a little place called Preddy's Creek, near a place called Piney Mountain. Today, if you go to Virginia, the town of Gordonsville is actually where you'll find the historical marker that says, near this place, General Sumter was born. And that sign, you can go online and read it. They actually do a pretty good job of giving a general history of Sumter. Everything that I read on there is factual. That's kind of rare, actually. when you see different things in different places, there's a lot of things in history that you can't always verify. So that's where he grows up. He grows up tending sheep there in the meadows, and his father has a grist mill that he works at the grist mill. And somewhere around the time of his early teenage years, his dad passed away. When his dad passes away, he's not really indentured, but his mom more or less makes him go work for a local farmer. He meets a close friend that he would grow up with, and I think he's one of the gentlemen that he would later leave, and he joins the Virginia militia. And of course, in the 1750s, the Virginia militia is going off to fight in the Ohio River Valley. They're fighting the French and Indian War. So Private Thomas Sumter. In 1756, young Thomas Sumter joins the Virginia militia as a private. The French and Indian War is raging as Britain and France and their Native American allies are fighting for the control of North America. And a contingent of Virginians led by George Washington, including Sumter's militia unit, joins a large British expedition sent to drive the French out of the Ohio River Valley. And this, of course, is probably where Sumter meets George Washington for the first time. There's no paperwork that you can find that can verify that. By the end of the Revolution and the time that they're in Washington, of course, they're familiar with one another. But during that time, they probably met for the first time. Some accounts plug Sumter into some different events that George Washington was part of, but we know that Sumter was there when they took Fort Duquesne from the French, and it becomes Fort Pitt, of course. So that's, a famous battle that most people are familiar with the French and Indian War. So Thomas Sumter would have been part of that expedition. When he returns as a sergeant, and around that time, there's a lot of fighting that's taking place on the frontier with the Cherokee. And Thomas Sumter, during that time period where the British are making peace with the Cherokee, and you can study all about everything that takes part with the Cherokee and the lower Cherokee towns, and even in the upstate of South Carolina. I think Lake Toxaway is there now, but the fort that was there was the Kiowa Station, something along those lines. There are some peace treaties that are being drawn up, and the Cherokee and the British are making peace. When this takes place, I'll just read what I have written here real quick to kind of lead to that. From 1758 to 1761, the two fight each other over land and trading abuses. After a peace treaty is signed, Sergeant Thomas Sumter joins an expedition to the Cherokee towns. These would be the over-the-hill towns, so he'd be going deep into Cherokee land, into what is now the Smoky Mountains. It would take a long time to get there. He is asked to go on this Timberlake expedition by one of his commanding officers, and they face a lot of hardship. This is where Sumter's story starts getting really interesting. So Timberlake wants to take the water route to Tumultly, I believe is how you pronounce it. It is the Cherokee town where they apparently make their peace agreements whenever they are signing or are talking peace talks. So he is asked to go there. And against the Cherokees' advice, they said, we're going to take the water out. Thomas Sumter pays for a lot of the supplies to start this voyage himself, but he does so by borrowing money from a local Virginian. So they set out and they take the water routes. At that time, the water is very low. And they end up dragging a canoe. Sumter's the one that's in the water, and they're getting close to November, and he's out in the icy water. So there's all kind of accounts in Timberlake's journal about Sumter's exploits. Timberlake, by the end of this journey, thinks Sumter's like the greatest guy in the world, because Sumter's doing a lot of things that we would consider heroic in some aspects, very careless and reckless in other aspects, but he's helping them kind of keep it all together so they can finish this mission. And they finally make it to the Cherokee upper towns. So when they arrive there, they stay there for a long time. The Cherokee language becomes more and more familiar with Sumter, although they have an interpreter that is hired to go with them by the name of McCormick. Not McCormick the way it's spelled here, but a little different spelling. He learns a lot of the Cherokee, and he becomes very familiar with the people and their customs. He gains a lot of their respect. And Sumter is accompanying Ostenaco, which is translated more or less man-killer. And Ostenaco, one of these leading chiefs, is going with this group back to Williamsburg. They're going to Williamsburg, Virginia. And while they are there and they do the peace treaty and they do the peace talks, Ostenaco sees a picture of the new king. They're being entertained at the College of William and Mary, and they see this picture, and when they see it, Ostenaco makes a decision that he will not go home until he looks upon the great father, King George III, the new king of England. So whatever kind of transpires at that time, they say, okay. They decide that they're going to take Ostenaco, and he takes 2 other Cherokee leaders with him to London. And lo and behold, they asked Timberlake and Sumter to accompany them on this mission. So this is where Sumter starts gaining, his familiarity with all these very high-to-do things in the world and what's going on in the world at this time. So Sumter leaves Virginia. They sail across the Atlantic. The Atlantic voyage was very rough. The guy that they hired to be the interpreter actually dies midway across the Atlantic. So when they arrive in England, Sumter becomes the main interpreter for the Cherokee and for the people there in England. Long story short, they entertain a lot of people there in England. Newspapers are writing about them. They're drawing pictures. You can research it very well on the internet, the pictures that they drew of the Cherokee leaders. And Sumter and Timberlake bought the nice red coats, and everybody thought they were being accompanied by these nice British officers, so forth and so on. And they meet King George III, and Sumter kind of stumbles through the meeting, interpreting between Ostenaco and King George III. But he does. He kind of admits later, there's some history there that he admits later to his mom that he kind of stumbles through that whole thing, but they make it. And they said that he hung on all the words of King George III, but the Cherokee, he was still trying to get familiar, I think, more or less with what was being said. And he had to kind of slow his way through some of the conversation. Ostenaco was known for being a brilliant speaker, very captivating speaker. A young Thomas Jefferson heard him speak there near William and Mary before they left. And Thomas Jefferson writes about how he's a great orator. He didn't understand a single word he said, but he was captivated by what the Cherokee chief was saying. So Sumter works his way through that. So they come back home. When they come back home, one of the officials there wants them to go through Charlestown instead of going back to Virginia. Timberlake is like completely opposed to that. Ostenaco had to be talked into it. But Sumter, with the permission of Timberlake, agrees to go with them on the voyage from England back through Charlestown, South Carolina. So when they do so, there's a great little part here in this book, and I didn't come to read to you out of the book, but there is one little part here that if I could kind of read the introduction, I think it's really neat the way that the author puts it. So let me find the page here. It might be in the Bass book here. Pretty sure Gregory wrote it. Let's see. Yes, here it is. She puts, there was a stir along the waterfront of Charlestown, South Carolina, on a day in late October 1762. For His Majesty's frigate at Prouvé, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, had just arrived from London. Among those who stepped ashore from the vessel were 3 impassive Cherokee warriors, brilliant in robes of blue and scarlet ceremonial paint and medals, and further distinguished by having in their train a young soldier in the scarlet uniform of a sergeant. The unknown attendant of the Indians was Thomas Sumter, originally of the Virginia backwoods, but now returning from London, where the savages had been accorded royal honors, and at the behest of the British ministry, he was about the king's business of seeing them safe home again. The young Virginian, although of less than average height, had powerful shoulders and was as quick and supple in his movements as the Indians themselves, while his alert bearing indicated a man who could think on his feet and meet emergencies halfway. If you read Timberlake's journal or listen to parts of his journal, you get this understanding of Sumter that she's writing about here. For the first time, his quick blue eyes saw the port of the region where for the next 70 years he was to play a leading role as planner, soldier, promoter, politician, and a great tradition. Carelessly, his glance had passed over the shoal in the harbor where Fort Sumter would one day rise, and a century later close the sea gates of the city of a siege destined to carry the name of Sumter around the world. So I thought that was a neat introduction. You think about Sumter, first time he's in South Carolina, he comes into Charleston Harbor, and he goes right past what used to be the sandbar that they decided to build up and build Fort Sumter. And they named it while he was still alive because they decided to plan that fort after the War of 1812. It took a long time to build it, and they decided upon the name to honor that revolutionary figure of Thomas Sumter. Of course, he'd be long dead before it actually was engaged in the Civil War, but it would carry his name through history forever, long past his Revolutionary War endeavors and so on and so on. So I thought that was well worth the reading. I think the way that Gregory put that kind of captures the imagination. All right, so Thomas Sumter, the Cherokee, he is now in South Carolina. When he returns through South Carolina, he actually goes first to escort them to the towns of the Cherokee. In doing so, there is a Baron Desjardins who is trying to stir up the Cherokee once again against the British. He's in the Cherokee towns talking to them about how the French are winning the war. This is right towards the end of the French and Indian War. And Sumter learns of his whereabouts while he's staying there. And Sumter wants this man stopped. A lot of the native leaders there don't want to get involved in doing that. I think they're caught between believing him versus believing Sumter. They're also remote from these powers anyway. And Sumter's finally given the green flag. And they say, well, if you want to arrest him, you have to do it all by yourself. And Sumter does. Apparently, according to the account, I mean, these guys are going at it on the ground, rolling around. Some other Native Americans are kept from intervening. And Sumter overcomes him, ties him up, throws him over his horse, and begins taking him back. When he gets him back to South Carolina, down to Charlestown, Governor Boone celebrates what Sumter has done. The South Carolina Gazette apparently writes stories about Desjardins being brought in, and Sumter being the one that brought him in, single-handedly, and all these things. And so he begins to gain that reputation. He once again leaves South Carolina. In his journey up through the middle of South Carolina, the beginnings of the backcountry, he goes up the Santee area, and he sees these crossroads there. He's there at Nelson's Ferry. And he sees the springs. According to the biography, he's there and he sees the springs of Utah Springs. And he thinks to himself, this would be a great place to build a store. He sees the crossroads of what is the low country of South Carolina, what is the beginning of the back country of South Carolina, and he sees land for the taking. And he leaves South Carolina, and he keeps that in the back of his mind, and he goes back home to Virginia. But when he arrives back home to Virginia, lo and behold, this guy who he borrowed those 60 pounds from to start this expedition with the Cherokee a couple years earlier is mad because he hasn't paid that debt. And he gets thrown in debtor's prison. So Sumter's going to jail. When he gets back home, he spends a short while talking to his mother and some of his family, telling his mother all about how he met King George III, how he was there in the Cherokee towns, and how he brought in Dijon and went down to Charlestown, and how he met Governor Boone and Governor Farquhar and all these things that are going on. And he's arrested. So in jail, he has a close friend that comes to visit him. This close friend talks the jailers into letting him stay the night there with Sumter. According to tradition, he gives Sumter a tomahawk and 10 guineas, and the next day he helps Sumter escape. So one account says Sumter used the 10 guineas to kind of pay his bill to get out, but on one account it says that there was no bailsman and no bondsman. He was taken into this place and he was put in prison, but his friend helps him to escape. And he leaves Virginia, kind of as a fugitive, if you will. He leaves Virginia and he tells his friend, you know, more or less, long story short, he hopes to one day pay him back. And he leaves and comes back to South Carolina. And he finds himself down on the Santee, and his dream of what he set out to do when he first saw that crossroads there at the Santee and the Congaree and the Wateree, that same area where those three rivers kind of come together, he builds a store. And he starts a new life for himself. He doesn't come directly to that place. I think he stays in Long Canes for a while, kind of between Cherokee lands and the civilization in South Carolina, and he makes a decision. I'm going to go back towards South Carolina where I've got a little reputation, and I'm going to make a life for myself. And he does. When he gets to South Carolina, he is given some money as reimbursement. It actually is sent to him from England because South Carolina refuses to pay. South Carolina says, we didn't hire you to do this expedition. We're not going to pay you for your expenses. But he gets money from England, and it's enough money to get him started. I think it's 700 pounds. And he starts the store. Long story short, in that particular area, today, that's known as the Jacks Creek area, where he builds some mills. He builds a store there near Nelson's Ferry, a little bit further down on the Santee. A lot of this land that he later acquires is underwater today because there's a large lake there, of course, Lake Marion. But you can still see some of these places. And there's historical markers and so forth. So he meets a woman who was married to a Mr. Jameson when he arrives. Mr. Jameson passes away, and Mary Canty Jameson is courted by the younger Sumter, and because of his reputation and because he's a hard worker and he's starting to make a name for himself, they marry. She agrees to marry him, and she's very wealthy. She's living in a very large plantation there at Great Savannah, and Sumter marries into that. Like a lot of the old leaders of our country, they know how to marry well, like George Washington himself. So Thomas Sumter marries well, and now he is a planter. And he owns a grist mill, a sawmill, there near Jacks Creek. He's got a store, and he's got a large plantation. And he and Mary do very well for himself. I think he's a justice of the peace around the time that the American Revolution kind of kicks off. I want to talk a little bit about Mary, but I think I'll come back to that when I talk a little bit about some of his family members. So when the war starts, Thomas Sumter the Patriot. When the winds of revolution start to blow, Thomas Sumter sides with the Patriots. History tells us that he actually heard Christopher Gadsden talk down in Charleston. And when he heard Christopher Gadsden talk, that was kind of like the tipping moment in his life where he became that supporter of the American cause, the patriot cause, and so forth and so on. You know, everybody, I think, at that time had to make that decision why they were going to choose, what they were going to choose, and maybe that was his moment. You know, maybe Christopher Gadsden, was really talking it up, and that helped him put things in perspective. But that's what tradition says. So he sides with the Patriots. He serves in the South Carolina 1st Provincial Congress in 1774. But soon joins the State Troop Rangers as a captain. He takes part in the Great Snow Campaign. A lot of people don't know that about Sumter, but yeah, he was there. I think Richard Richardson, another guy there from the Sumter area, was a leader of that particular campaign. Richard Richardson lived very close to where Sumter lived, actually. Richard Richardson lived closer to the beginning of what we call the high hills of the Santee. Sumter was a little south of there, but eventually Sumter moved to that area and lived in that same area. Richard Richardson would die during the American Revolution. So he takes part in the Great Snow Campaign. They would go to the 96 area, and capture the loyalists and kind of try to, turn the tide to where people in South Carolina won't support the British. During that time, in June, of course, of 1776, he is a member of the 6th South Carolina Regiment. He is down in Charleston when the Battle of Fort Sullivan takes place, of course, later known as Fort Moultrie. So he's not in the fort, of course. And if you read some things online, I read something today that was, as a historian, we say it was kind of disturbing, but they said he was part of the 2nd South Carolina Regiment. He wasn't, of course. Marion was. But Sumter was part of the 6th South Carolina Regiment, so he was a member of the Continental Army once that became part of the Continental Army. And he was there from what some of the biographies say. It's hard to pinpoint Sumter during the Battle of Fort Moultrie. But according to the biographies, the best we could tell, he was somewhere outside the fort, maybe along that area, I think known as Long Island, where the British were trying to make a landing. And he was probably somewhere out there with some of the riflemen trying to fight the British off from making that landing. I know that Dr. Nason says Sumter was more or less there in Charleston. But again, I don't think there's anything in writing anywhere that can verify exactly where he was. But being part of the 6th Regiment, I think he was there probably somewhere with the riflemen, keeping the British from making a landing on the beaches as they were trying to come behind the fort. So he was there, and then later he is involved with the Cherokee Uprising, of course, in the Cherokee territory, which would later become the new acquisition after the Cherokee are kind of pushed out of South Carolina. So he's up there fighting. Now Sumter really doesn't do a lot of, one of the old historical markers in Sumter County that I guess a car ran over it or something, it went missing on Highway 521, said he was an Indian fighter. I think that more or less refers to, and we tried to rewrite that because we actually redid it, and we're supposed to replace the marker very soon. But I think that more or less refers to what he was doing in Virginia during the French and Indian War. Because here in South Carolina, although he was part of that mission that went and started burning those Cherokee towns because of the Cherokees uprising, the British got them to attack South Carolina during that time. He wasn't engaged in any fighting there. He was always in an area where the other guys were doing the fighting, and he was somewhere else. So then he ends up down in South Georgia for a while, around 1777, 1778. According to what we can see in history, he probably got malaria while he was down there. He's very close to the Florida border. There was always this idea that maybe from St. Augustine the British might try to come up from the south by land, although it would not be during the attack of Savannah. That would be a little bit later, of course, when they more or less made that landing and they attacked Savannah, Georgia. But a couple years before then, they thought it might happen. So they sent some Americans down there. And during that time, Sumter's not always present at some of the meetings, although we know he was there, and they think he had malaria. They think he was very sick at some point during that time. When they come back to Charleston, the biographers more or less kind of say camp life in the barracks didn't agree with Sumter. They weren't doing anything. They were in Charleston, in 1778. He resigns his commission, he goes home. And I think sometime during that time, he also serves in, I guess, the newly formed General Assembly. But he doesn't consider himself part of the Continental Army when the attack on Charleston takes place, because he had already resigned about a year and a half before that, went back to his plantation, went back to some civic stuff in South Carolina. So in 1780, this is where Thomas Sumter comes out of the woodwork and makes the name for himself as the Fighting Gamecock. So a little bit about that nickname before I get into that. If you read some information online, and we love online information, no, not really. Some of it's great. Some of it can kind of get you going down the right pathway. But you always read these accounts that Thomas Sumter had this rooster's tail feather in his hat, and these guys named him the Fighting Gamecock, and you say because of his fighting style, he was known as the Fighting Gamecock. The best we can tell by biographical research is Thomas Sumter was doing some recruiting in the backcountry, and he came across these well-known gunsmiths that he was purposely going to see, known as the Gillespie brothers. And the Gillespie brothers were known for bantam rooster fighting, cock fighting, and that was a very popular sport. Even according to the biography, when Sumter was a kid, he kind of did that back home in Virginia. Very fitting for his nickname that would come later. But while he was there, they had this particular fighting rooster that had come from a prize blue hen. And Sumter saw them there with the cockpit, with them fighting these bantam roosters, and he's recruiting these men, and he says, gentlemen, if you come with me, I'll show you a fight amongst men. Because he's in the backcountry recruiting for his militia. And the Gillespie brothers say, he's a son of the blue hen, you know, he is the Gamecock. So apparently they're the ones that gave him this name, kind of an admiration because of his fighting spirit, not so much because of something he did on the battlefield. The nickname does spread, however. Cornwallis refers to him as the Gamecock. Bannister Tarleton refers to him as the Gamecock. And of course that is what a lot of people call him. And even Sumter County, something I recently read, even Sumter County way back when, at one time was called Gamecock County or something like that. I don't know if that was ever in writing, but it was something that people kind of referred to. And we are known as the Gamecock City because of that. So a little bit about his nickname. In 1780, the war in the north, of course, the British was not going in their favor. Most of you are familiar with the American Revolution. You know that there was kind of a stalemate, a standstill, and by 1780, well actually by 1779, the British had made the decision, there are loyalists in the South, we need to hit the South, we need to take over the southern colonies. So they attacked Savannah, Georgia. From Savannah, Georgia, they attacked Charleston the second time. And they do it much different than they did the first time when they failed at the Battle of Fort Sullivan and Charleston Falls. When Charleston falls, I think over 5,000 Americans are captured. It is a huge defeat, probably the largest defeat of the war on the American side in terms of numbers. I think it's Benjamin Lincoln that surrenders down there. So Sumter's not there. Sumter's at home in Great Savannah. But he has I guess we'll call it a vacation home. He has a vacation home because, you know, Great Savannah is there on the Santee in the low country. In the summertime, malaria and all those things are pretty bad. And these planters head to the high hills. Some of them actually go up to like the Blowing Rock area and all that later. But in South Carolina, there's a region near the banks of the Wateree River known as the high hills of the Santee. It's high enough and the air is clean enough. And by the way, there's a lot of natural springs there. Today, I have a friend at our church, and he's got a natural spring right behind his property in that area that just kind of gushes out. And Bradford Springs and all those places are there. So this is a healthy place compared to the low country. And Sumter apparently has a home there. Tradition tells us where the home was located. And when Tarleton leaves Charleston in pursuit of the Patriots, the Whigs, if you will, that are against the king. We all know about Buford and him being in the Waxhaws area by the time Charleston catches up with him. Well, I believe it's a Colonel Campbell, forgive me, I don't remember the rank, I know that's not important, but one of the guys that's under Tarleton's command when they come up through the high hills in pursuit of going up to the up country because they hear about Buford's men coming down from North Carolina. Sumter's son finds out the British are coming through the area. And Sumter's son rides home to warn his dad. And when he does so, he and his mom stay there at home.